Welcome back to the lore and legend of Super Robot Tyson. Today we're going to take a look at an interesting series that was part of the staple, which is Super Robot Tyson. We're going to be talking about Gundam. Now, of course, Gundam is a very familiar series because it was done by Yoshiyuki Tomino, or India Toku World. He is otherwise known as Kill 'Em All Tomino. The reason why he's called that is because he notoriously kills certain series that just didn't seem right to him. He is the maker of such series as Space Runaway Ideon, the Kido Senshi Gundam series, Wolf's Rain, and Brainpower, just to name a few. Which is also in this game. Now, Gundam goes all the way back from the 70s. The series itself is 30 years old. To this very day, from UC 0079 to what I believe now is Unicorn, Gundam has played a staple throughout the Super Robot Tyson universe for quite some time. Since the Prime series. And the Prime series is the Game Boy version. The Game Boy and Nintendo version were the Prime series, and then from then on, Super Nintendo and onward. And of course, Gundam also was a novel. The stories were changed because the novels were slightly darker than the anime series. And of course, the Gundams always had pilots that were the psionic variety. Or a psychic variety, if you want to call it that too. Namely, they are either new types, cyber new types, and in Seed, in which this is where this Gundam takes place, you have coordinators, but they all fall into the category of being inties or new types. Now, of course, every Gundam story has a bittersweet ending. All except for one, in which was in the which was in Super Robot Tyson R, and that one was X. Gundam X is the only series that actually ended off on a good note rather than a bad one. But the downside to Gundam X was it was too sweet, and therefore, its life was cut short due to the ratings and the fact that it was supposed to be longer, but they cut the series short a few episodes. Another thing I do want to point out is that in most Super Robot Tyson games, when you're doing a route split, by far, if you take the real robot route, which that's what the Gundam is, a real robot, compared to Mazinger and Daltonus and Godmars, they're all super robots. This is pretty much real robot. And real robot routes are always, if not prepared or leveled right, they can get pretty hard, considering that such units as Gundam or the Macross Valkyries are concerned. They're usually live and very agile, so therefore trying to go through such missions are a real pain. So therefore you might want to cast Strike as much as you can, or if you have an all-out station like Love, you might want to do that too. But regardless, Gundam has been one of the most sought-after series in the Super Robot Tyson universe ever since the first game. Right now, in the series as a whole, Super Robot Tyson is now at OE, or Operation Extend. I believe that's what it's called, Operation Extend. But but as far as the series is concerned, it is at OE and is still in Japan. Still running in Japan, but over here we're not going to get it. The only way we will possibly get it is by actually import. And some imports of the game, of anything related to Super Robot Tyson. I kid you not when I say this, because I went to AX a few weeks ago, and I can tell you, they go for about $90. $90 or even higher. But no more than maybe $90. Consoles are totally different, because they cost at least $300. You're paying base value, of course. But in any case, Gundam has the rich history of war. It's a war anime, so therefore it is the opposite of what Macross is. Because Macross focus more on the pilots better than the mechs. Macross focus more on the situation of the war and how to end it, whereas in the Gundam series, mainly the Gundams itself get more face time than the actual pilots, because the pilots are always on the go. So therefore, you take a Gundam series and you watch it from start to finish, it'll basically tell you you're not going to get that much story from the pilots, because either they just don't want to deal with trying to share what happened, to they don't give a fuck. I mean, that's all there is, and they're gonna stick with it. Whereas in Macross, it's a more social anime. It's a more war social anime, whereas Gundam is more like a war-torn anime. And such notable names like Amuro Ray, Char Aznable, Kiri Yamato, Raoul Creuset, Mou Laflaga, Mue Ramius, Bright Noah, they all come to mind. And Gundam is probably the only series that has, like, it's probably one of the main series that actually have Gaidens, like side stories. Like G is a Gaiden, G Gundam is a Gaiden. Crossbone Gundam is, I believe, a Gaiden. There are plenty of Gundam stories Gundam series that I know. that basically have guidance, side stories that are canon to the main story, and sometimes, oh yeah, and Gundam Wing, the most sought after. Gundam Wing, which is not in this game, thank goodness, are by far the most popular guidance, or side stories. Sometimes they are side stories, sometimes they're not side stories. Sometimes they tell of an alternate century, whereas, there's a future century or something like that. But it's always somewhere within the universal century. So always remember that there's an alternate century, there's probably a future century, and of course there's after war, which is where Gundam X comes from. Now, to me, I believe Gundam X is more like a what if. Personally, that's why I think Gundam X was a what if. But it was a good what if. But, as I stated as a whole, Gundam X is more, as I stated, Gundam as a whole is one of the big staples that holds SRW together. Because, to be fair and honest, you cannot go wrong with a Gundam in your party. And you can't go wrong with a good new type, depending on who's piloting it. And that's another thing about the series that you had to respect. The fact that in the Gundam universe, any pilot, being new type or not, they can basically switch through Gundam series. They can basically fly any Gundam, or pilot any Gundam in this case. Like Seabook Arno. Seabook Arno from F1, I believe. I might be wrong. No, F91. Gundam F91. He could pilot. Say, like, if he was in this universe, he could pilot Freedom Gundam or Justice Gundam, or maybe an Astray, or probably RX-78, something like that, or maybe Wing Zero. He can, for some reason, in that universe, you can basically jump into a Gundam and you're like, oh, you can pilot this thing. It's happened in Dynasty Warriors Gundam. It can indeed happen in the Super Robot Tyson universe. And probably the Gundam universe, which it has. If you play Battle Assault, if you ever heard Battle Assault, try it, and you'll see what I mean. But hopefully, after all this, I hope you have been enlightened by what knowledge I have about Gundam. If you have any feedback at all about Gundam that you want to add to it, please feel free to do so. I'd be most delighted to hear what you think as well. So I've been the Tenkai Chief Gaming, and this was another lore and legend of Super Robot Tyson. Stay tuned for the next part, in which we take a look at another series in which we all tend to remember.